Spin your passion into a business with Shopify and break sales records with the world's best converting checkout. Let's hear that one more time. The world's best converting checkout. Shopify's legendary checkout makes it easier for customers to shop on your website, across social media, and everywhere in between. Now that's music to your ears. Any way you spin it, you can be a smash hit with Shopify. Start your $1 a month trial today at shopify.com/records.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, I'm Susan Kaufman. I'm here for Attitude Magazine, and you're listening to Attitude's ADHD Experts. Our topic today is survival strategies for moms of ADHD, and our speaker is Ellen Littman, Ph.D. Dr. Littman will be giving us strategies for stopping the blame and guilt that so many ADHD moms live with, as well as, in response to your questions, providing tips to help you survive and even thrive with this adult disorder. Dr. Littman is an internationally recognized clinical psychologist. She's worked in the field of attention disorders for almost 30 years. She specializes in identifying and treating complex presentations of ADHD with specific expertise in issues affecting women and girls, which, as many of you know, can be quite different from those affecting men. Dr. Littman's the author or co-author of numerous books, including Understanding Girls with ADHD, Understanding Women with ADHD, Gender Differences in ADHD, and many others. Please visit her website, Dr. Ellen Littman, Littman.com, for more information. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Littman. There's a huge number of women out there looking forward to hearing from you, and we're so grateful for your time.
I'm really happy to be here, and I want to give as much information as I can. The first thing that I want to talk about is just letting you know that being a mom is challenging for every woman. And I don't think there are any exceptions to that. And it is even more difficult if you're a mom with ADHD. As my friend Sari Solden has said, this is really the job from hell, in that everything that you need to do in terms of organizing and prioritizing and time management and balancing everyone's needs, all of those things require a perfect choreography of the executive functions of the brain. And probably most of you know that that is one of the things that's impaired in the world of ADD. I tend to say ADD instead of ADHD. They're interchangeable in terms of my talk, but it goes faster if I say ADD. And so these things are actually more difficult. And parenting advice, and there's a lot of parenting advice out there, is actually not written for you. It is not written for moms with ADD. It is so that they suggest things that if you are already organized and not time challenged, then you can do those things. But otherwise, you try to do the things that they suggest, and they're still hard for you, and you feel even worse and more alone. So what I want to do is normalize your experience and validate that what's going on for you is going on for millions of other women, and that this is not hard because you have characterological flaws or because you're not trying hard enough, but that there are things that really do get in the way. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that get in the way, and then some of the ways that we can circumvent those things. So in terms of cognitive regulation, this is all about different kinds of self-regulation and how each one is a different kind of a struggle. In terms of disorganization, it is, everyone says, it's hard to organize your child when it's not easy for you to organize yourself or their things. And this is something that people feel like they must be able to organize themselves. And one of the ways to approach this is to get help even from your children, that this is something that everyone's going to work on together. And I'm going to talk about that more. Unreliable memory really affects giving out consequences. Consequences really need to be predetermined and immediate because it's stressful for you to come up with consequences when you're not feeling particularly reasonable at those moments, and that you can't always remember the punishments or even the infraction. But the point is that neither can your child, and so creating a set of consequences that everyone knows about earlier on saves you all of that agonizing. The problem with inconsistent stimulation is that for your brain, there are certain things that are going to be interesting and to focus on and high stimulation for you. And some of the rote parts of house tending and child caretaking are actually pretty boring, and they're boring to your brain. And you may be saying to your brain, we have to pay attention to this, and your brain is really saying, this is way too boring. And so that kind of inconsistency, is not you deciding to not pay attention to something, but it is really finding a way to make it more interesting and stimulating to your brain. And I'll talk about that later as well, ways to do that. And to be aware that restlessness is something, even though you may not be hyperactive in any way, there's an inner restlessness, a cognitive restlessness, an emotional restlessness that makes it hard to keep your mind in one place. Many women have said to me that it's almost impossible for them to sit on the floor and play a board game because their minds can't stay with that. And so some of these things are things that you may be aware of, but that you may be labeling yourself in a negative way if you can't do those things, as opposed to saying, okay, this is part of my brain wiring. Okay, so what do I do now? But it's accepting that some of these things are part of the wiring and not part of you not trying hard enough. And the binary worldview, which is that things tend to be made into a black and white view, so that it makes it really easier for you to figure out. There aren't as many shades of gray. I could do this or I could do this. But the problem is in making those decisions, you have to leave out a lot of the information that might be more helpful to you. Again, it's about accepting, okay, this is why I'm choosing to do this that way. I mean, this is also what my brain is choosing to do. And then so understand that that will affect your choices, but that it is a shorthand that's working for you right now. Okay, similarly, in the world of emotional regulation, the biggest issue I think for people in general with ADD, but for women specifically, and this is just becoming recognized. It wasn't even considered one of the symptoms of ADD until recently, is emotional hyperreactivity, which is whatever the trigger is, you'll probably react a little quicker, a little more intensely. It may stay with you a little longer. And that will basically sort of skew your responses. So there's already a low frustration tolerance, and so more things are going to be triggers. Often it's a way to think about it, although I don't know if they use this metaphor anymore, is a canary in a coal mine. They used to send canaries into coal mines to see if there was dangerous gas in there, because they would be the vulnerable ones who would sort of respond quickly first. And ADD women are sort of those canaries in the coal mine that you're going to react first to whatever is going on physiologically in your environment. And the first thing that people feel is a sense of irritability. And it's a physiological irritability, but you're not necessarily aware that's what's going on. But you start feeling uncomfortable and a little bit frustrated and a little bit restless. And it's really about starting to have an emotion come up and not really be able to identify that. And the next thing that happens for many, many moms is, what I call a tsunami of anger. And a tsunami in that it overwhelms like a tidal wave, and it makes it so that you really can't think clearly anymore for the moments that you can only see the anger. And that is obviously very uncomfortable and dangerous to everybody. So some of it is about, recognizing that the irritability is the first sign, a red flag that some emotion is on its way. And then there are going to be feelings of anxiety. A lot of people describe franticness and agitation and panic, and, leading to getting overwhelmed. Again, the tendency is to ignore those early signs of feeling uncomfortably anxious, trying to get done what you need to get done. But then when it's almost too late, you realize you're so overwhelmed that, you can't think clearly. And the same thing happens with depressive feelings, where you start feeling a little bit sad about not being able to cope the way you want to. And by the time you really start to look at it or acknowledge what's going on, you're feeling pretty hopeless. So this is something that is just a moment-to-moment reactivity, and it's good to know that that is operating. And again, these are things to just be aware you're coping with every moment, and it helps you understand why your job is so difficult. The physiological regulation is just your body trying to respond to all kinds of hypersensitivities, whether it's sounds that are too loud or distracting sounds outside your window, or smells that are too strong, or just being touched in the wrong way. There's often issues when a bad fit where one person wants to be touched, a child and a mother, and the other person does not feel as comfortable being touched. This is, endlessly upsetting for both parties, and it really has to do with hypersensitivity, not with how people feel about each other. One of the most important things to talk about is estrogen. What we are finding out with research is that estrogen for women is really tightly tied to the experience of one's ADD symptoms. And the fluctuations in estrogen absolutely have an influence on all of the things we're talking about in terms of your ability to regulate. And when estrogen is higher, your dopamine levels are higher, and when it's lower, just before your period, all of the symptoms are amplified. So understanding the role that estrogen plays in the brain is a target organ for estrogen, which most people don't realize, so that all of your cognitive functions are affected by estrogen levels, and the fluctuations can really undermine you, and it's important to know that that's part of what's going on in your system, and again, to be aware of it. That's something you can't control. And then one of the things it affects is sleep cycles, and sleep deprivation is deadly because it intensifies ADD symptoms. It makes it harder to concentrate. It makes you more frustrated, makes you have a shorter fuse. And it's almost always happening in a household where there's ADD. And then there's self-medicating with food and or other substances. But the thing that is important that I say about food is that the ADD brain does not metabolize glucose really successfully, and it always thinks that there's not enough glucose for energy in the brain. So it keeps saying to you, send up more glucose in the form of, it wants you to eat carbohydrates or sugary things, so it'll be converted into glucose. So you find yourself drawn to carbohydrates, and you can be labeling yourself, oh, it's disgusting, why am I eating all these carbohydrates? So I just want you to know that your brain is really demanding that. So that it's not your imagination. Your brain is not saying, send up some more salad. It is saying, we need you to eat bread or pasta or bagels, so that it will be converted into glucose. And then the behavioral regulation is, okay, so all of those things are going on inside you. How do you end up responding? And it ends up being a certain kind of rigidity of making those binary choices. Okay, I've decided this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong thing to do, which ends up having extreme consequences. Again, very black and white. And you can put out, a black and white demand. But then when children get angry at you, you don't want to provoke a confrontation. So a lot of people put out those demands and get very anxious about them and then back off from them. It creates a really confusing place for you to be. You end up censoring yourself. You don't want a spouse angry at you. You don't want your peers angry at you when you take a rigid position. And a lot of women are concerned that the two choices are, if they're intense about their position, then they feel they are aggressive. And the other end of the continuum is sort of being a passive victim, and they feel like those are the two choices that they have. And there really are a lot of other choices on the continuum, but you can't see them at that moment because your brain is only choosing to see the highest stimulation choices. And what goes with those binary choices is that you're going to do it perfectly or not at all. And that there's a lot of obsessive overlay, particularly for women. And they get focused on the details of what needs to be done and can even become pretty perfectionistic, which are very intense demands on you. And that makes it even more rigid. I mean, if you set yourself up that this has to be done perfectly, there's only one way to go from there, and that is seeing that you're failing. On top of all of those things are societal expectations, which is that women with ADD don't fit the feminine ideal because the feminine ideal is pretty crazy. And it expects you to do all of these things cooperatively and organizing everybody and, not complaining and, and looking great while you do it, and there's setting up social lives in your house, and it's unrealistic really for anyone. And there's the part of you that gets that that's unrealistic, but there's also the part of you that pursues it anyway. And that's the conflict that I just want to point out, is that you can recognize that some of these things don't make sense, but you still can hear yourself saying, but I know I should. And as soon as you hear that word should, you know that you're on the train towards trying to conform to societal expectations that fit almost no one, but certainly no mom with ADD. And what ends up happening is then, you start comparing yourself to people and say, oh, they can do it and I can't, and everyone seems to be coping better than I am, and being ashamed of those differences, and believing that people see you as the person not coping well, and that this is totally on your shoulders to be able to manage everything perfectly, and if you can't, you don't measure up. And what happens when you start feeling that way is that you start internalizing negative messages that you've heard growing up, negative messages that you say to yourself. And the smarter you are, the more you start feeling like this should be doable, and what is wrong with me that I can't do it? And you start feeling inadequate and unworthy, and that people are going to see you as an imposter. You're trying to make it all look good and like you're holding it together, but they're going to find out the chaos that is, sort of behind the facade. And a lot of women then start being reluctant to socialize, where, they can't necessarily keep up with the article in the New Yorker, or, summarizing the issues in a recent movie, because they're busy catching up. And they keep their difficulties hidden, and they have very negative conversations with themselves about their negative self-image. They don't want to seem needy. They don't want to ask for help. They want to look like they have it together. But the reality is that your life is not just what's happening to you, but it's also the quality of your existence and how hard it is. And if you keep that hidden, no one really gets to know you. And when you're unknown, like, it interferes with intimacy with your significant other. They don't know what you're coping with, and you don't necessarily want to share all that frustration. But then there becomes sort of a wall where, they are not understanding what your experience is, and it becomes very lonely. And then the tolls are high, that there is just chronic stress. You're unable to relax. You don't feel entitled to relax. You always feel like you're trying to catch up. But that is not good for your body. It saps your resources. It lowers your resistance. And it makes it more likely that you're going to get sick. And then you don't necessarily attend to your own self-care because you're attending to everyone else's first. Your health maintenance is on the back burner. So you don't necessarily get to do anything consistently. Take vitamins, exercise, do physical therapy. You're moving fast. There's more injuries, more accidents, fender benders, twisting your ankle. And everyone feels like they're supposed to have perfect meals, which is another one of those, we need a new yardstick. But it's something that women are always demanding of themselves and labeling themselves negatively if they don't do it. And then you invalidate yourself, and then you accept invalidation from other people saying that you're not doing a good enough job, and, even accepting, abusive comments from your children who, also have ADD and can get really angry. And you start making negative assumptions about how others see you, and you can start wanting to withdraw from people and isolating. And then that loss of perspective, when you're alone with these thoughts, can lead to a lot of hopelessness. So there's a cycle that can become really negative if you don't find other ways of coping. And so in the survival range, the first thing to do is to acknowledge your own ADD and that it does impact you and it impacts your family. You can be so focused on your children's ADD that you may not be thinking about your own, and really acknowledging that, it's just as serious. It has just as many symptoms. It's extremely far-reaching. Also, acknowledging what we call a bad fit. And however you're wired, it is very likely that your child or one of your children is wired the opposite way. If you're the outgoing, gregarious, active, talking a lot type of ADD wiring, you may have a child who is the withdrawn, tuning out, overwhelmed by too much stimulation wiring. it almost always happens. And then each person is frustrated with the other person's functioning. And that kind of a fit is very, very frustrating. One person is always overwhelmed by too much stimulation coming at them, and the other person is always frustrated by not getting enough of a response from the other person. And it's a bad fit, but there is no one to blame for that. You're not responsible for it. So one of the things that's important is getting treatment. And again, I'm sure you're very focused on treatment for your child, but not necessarily for yourself. But it is important, and I'm not talking medication, not medication, but I am talking about being able to talk to a therapist who gets it, who not just gets ADD, but gets what it's like for mothers with ADD to cope. And I mean, if they get it, then you will truly find some validation and support. And there are other kinds of support systems, whether it's, a local chapter of CHAD or some other support group, or the special ed parents group through your school, or letting some friends know about what's going on, or telling your spouse what's going on. But in other words, it is really hard to go this alone, and there's no reason to, but a lot of moms feel this is my sole burden to carry as an albatross, and it is a very heavy burden. So I think it's about respecting your own feelings about how hard this is. A lot of women try to say, no, I'm overstating that. It's not that hard. It shouldn't be that hard. Why am I complaining and whining? No, it is extremely hard. There's no complaining and whining about it. And feel entitled to not take on more. Again, this is part of the societal things about women, that they're supposed to say yes and do everything, and that's ridiculous. Your plate is over full. Don't say yes to other things. And don't seek out normal. Normal is it's overrated. It's boring. The idea is not to be normal and linear. It's just to find a way to live and feel good. So in terms of thriving, one of the things to do is to choose your battles. And I'm sure you've heard that before, but that's really hard to do. You have to let some things go and just say, these are not that important. And we can talk later about which things are okay to let go and which aren't. Everyone makes their own choice to some extent. Focus on everyone's strengths, your child's strengths, because, ultimately the things that aren't strengths, you're not going to be able to do that much about. And you can either focus on the one thing that is hard, or on the fact that everyone's trying hard to do their best. The idea of problem solving together, which means that instead of you figuring out the answer to everything, you can say to your children, and children as young as 5 can participate in this, we have to solve this problem. What should we do? And believe it or not, children never say, I don't care, you figure it out, I want to do nothing. They like being considered as a responsible party who has input, and you can find a way where, they may have ideas that you haven't even thought of, and it's about solving it together so that it isn't all on your shoulders. That is not a failure. That is a success, to realize that delegating is not just a good idea, it's critical to survive. The other thing is to build in downtime, both for your children and for yourself. You need private time to regroup. Even if it's 10 minutes, you owe it to yourself. And I know that you may feel, I have so much to do, I can't possibly do that. You will be a happier and healthier human being and better able to cope if you accept that you need some downtime, and that you have to build it in. Nothing happens in the world of ADD unless you actually schedule it in. You can't wait until you find a time that says, this is a good time for downtime. Similarly, spending time enjoying each other means that instead of always dealing with your child in terms of, here's what we have to get done now, here's what we have to get done now, and now we have to do this, that you actually have to schedule some time, even if it's 15, 20 minutes, where we are not going to get anything done. We are just not going to have to be constructive. We're going to just do whatever. We're going to color. We're going to talk about, something that's fun. We're going to go get ice cream. But something where the interaction between the two of you is just about being together and not about performing and achieving and catching up and what's expected. Because that can become toxic to everybody's system. And accepting that marching to your own drummer is a really great way to go, that nobody can decide for you the best way for you to live, and that you are judging yourself much more harshly than other people, and that finding, again, that this, something, your own yardstick, it's just another way of saying that is going to be the path that works for you, is the only one that really matters. It doesn't matter what other people are doing because they're not, walking in your shoes. And although it is really hard, it is really important to be able to laugh, and to laugh with your kids, and to be able to accept when something has been forgotten or you're late, that this is not a horrible failure that defines you. And that is a really good thing to keep for yourself and for your kids, and that you embrace effort, regardless of the way that it actually is done, as long as it moves you towards something that you want to do. So just remember that none of this stuff has to be your responsibility alone, and if you engage everybody in this being a process of keeping your family and your home working together, you will not feel so alone with it, and you will actually have a staff of helpers who will help you get closer to what you need to do. Okay, so that's, I think, and I hope you're seeing the last slide, which is actually a quote from Frank Zappa, but I think that it applies, that really we move ahead not by doing the same thing as everyone else, but that we can embrace deviation from the norm. The norm is a little bit overrated. Okay, so on to questions.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's just been outpouring on the screen that I'm seeing of women saying, oh my gosh, this is me. When Anne says this entire seminar could be called Anne's Way of Life. And Leslie says, thanks for helping me put a name to what I've been living with my whole life. Why is it that you think that women have so little support? I mean, to that point, a number of people have said, there's not a CHAD chapter near them. They don't find that their family recognizes what they're going through. I mean, what can people do to not to feel so alone and so misunderstood?
Right. So there are several levels to that. I mean, this is one of the first steps, because you have to believe that this is about something other than you just not being good enough. And women in our society just tend to go that way. There's a lot of research that says that women tend to internalize their experiences, whereas men really don't. And as a result, the negative self-talk and the low self-esteem is much more an issue for women than for men in general, and then in the world of ADD, much more so for women with ADD. So first of all, it's buying into the fact that this really is a huge problem and it's not your fault. And it is true that that in many parts of the country, it is hard to find anybody who has this viewpoint. It's still relatively new. I mean, we're only really embracing now that, I mean, first that girls could have ADD, which is, you know, what our book was about, and then that adults could have ADD, and that, you know, especially high-functioning women with ADD look so different than hyperactive boys with ADD that very few, you know, I mean, people in society, I mean, whether it's your internist or whether it's your friends or whether it's educators, they're not going to say, oh, I see that it's clear you're struggling with ADD. So no one is going to label that for you. And then there's the societal expectations. The general expectations are women are supposed to have it all together and, you know, be super women. And unfortunately, a lot of people buy into that, not necessarily intellectually, but emotionally they still do. So it's knowing that that's really, we've been sold a bill of goods on that, and that
right.
this is really, really hard, and everyone is entitled to say, these are the things that are hard for me, this is what I need help with. But right now, women are not that comfortable doing that, so that they are all leading, in some ways, secret lives. They present a facade of, you know, I look like other women and my kids are dressed like your kids and we're all signed up for the same after-school classes. But the chaos and the struggle and the pain and the torment that you're living with is the secret that you live with. But that's the stuff that will undo your life. Not whether or not, you know, your kids are 10 minutes late or whether or not they forgot the, you know, the form in order to be able to go on the field trip. But it is that kind of toxic feeling that you have about yourself that is going to be the thing that's ruining the quality of your life. So it is about finding ways to hear other voices. And, you know, there are some sites on the internet, not that many, where you can find like-minded women talking about this. But a lot of times you have to be the one who buys into it and even has to start that conversation. And it's a scary conversation to start because a lot of people feel that it exposes vulnerability because they're seeing it as personal, characterological vulnerability when it's not. It's like you're the most competent women in the world, but, you know, you have one hand tied behind your back because of brain wiring. But it's really sometimes very hard for women to buy into that. That was a very long answer, but I feel very passionately about this.
I just want to mention a couple of support places. One is called the Virtual CHAD chapter. It's at chad.org. If you don't know CHAD, it's a wonderful national support organization for people with ADHD. And also on ADD Connect, which is Attitude Magazine's support network, there are tons of people talking about all things related to attention deficit disorder and living with it. So those are just two areas. I'm sure there are others as well. And I think online may be the best place for those of you who are isolated in terms of finding support. I know we get letters all the time at Attitude saying, thank goodness there are people being discussed who understand me. So it's really important not to feel alone. I really agree with Dr. Littman on that. Dr. Littman, a number of people have also asked more about the hormone connection. I think many people feel they've not heard that before.
Right.
One person said, when I was pregnant, I was like Wonder Woman. I got everything done. Exactly. And other people said, when I was, I hit perimenopause, my symptoms got much worse. So yes. The estrogen connection is pretty important. And what do you suggest about that? People are wanting to know, is hormone treatment the answer? Is it ADHD medication? How do you cope with the hormonal implications and effect on ADHD?
Okay. I mean, it is so critically important. It is very new research so that, I mean, you can ask, but why is this? And not only can I not answer that, but at this moment, researchers can't answer exactly why as much as we now know wow, it's implicated in absolutely everything. It's implicated in women in terms of them their responses to food, their addiction to cigarettes. We're finding it's involved with sleep. So this is a whole separate ball game from what men are dealing with. So what we know is, and in fact, this is one of the reasons that they didn't even realize that girls had ADD, because for girls, ADD symptoms don't really show up in force until estrogen starts showing up in their systems. So you really start getting the intensity of mood symptoms after you start getting your period. And since the cutoff for ADD symptoms used to be age 7, girls tended not to look like they had symptoms. By the time they're 16, 17, suddenly everyone has ADD symptoms. And so the fluctuations during the month very much affect how you're going to be feeling at different times. They have shown that taking estrogen does improve your symptoms, but obviously although it changes from month to month what the risks are of that, but I don't think anyone's advising that that's the way to cope. Medication does help with that. They even have they are using antidepressant in the 10 days before people's periods to level out the some of the symptoms. So right now, how to treat it is still in the, no one is clear about the best answer for that. The important part is to know that it's operating. So in other words, starting at about, 38, then your estrogen starts decreasing in your system. That symptoms do start to get worse, and by the time you get to perimenopause, it is having an impact on your system. And then when you get to menopause, I have women come in who have never sought treatment before, but they all are like, why is this suddenly happening to me now? And it's even if you had a lot of good compensating techniques in place, that sudden drop in estrogen makes it hard for you to think. Verbal memory is sacrificed. Sleep problems, concentration, irritability. There's so many ways. Mood. All of those things are affected by estrogen. So we really didn't know that before. So it really is absolutely the combination of dopamine and estrogen. Those two things together. Whereas for other people, it's just the dopamine. So it's it's just a huge thing to know, and to know that unfortunately, as you get older, it is just it's another thing that's piling on. And yes, it's not fair.
Yeah, no, it's not, is it? Many questions. One common question is, how do I communicate this? If I come to accept my own ADHD and feel good about it, how do I communicate that to my friends, in the workplace, to my family? It's still seen as an excuse, or people feel that it's an excuse. What do you advise people in terms of talking with others or enlisting support in others in their network once we accept our ADHD and have come to terms with it?
Right. I mean, and that is the biggest deal, because you say the words, you say ADD out in the world, people have a million ideas of what that is in their heads. There is not a consistent idea. People don't understand what it is. Even among the people listening today, it's many people are still seeing it differently. It's hard to get your head around. And so a lot of people are thinking in terms of excuse, when it's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And it is a totally physiological explanation. It is just about the way your brain is wired. And it's particularly hard. The smarter you are and the better you compensate, the more likely people will doubt you. It's a horrible catch-22. So the harder that you struggle to cope and stay up late in the night and, try to hold everything together, the more likely it is that someone will say to you, "That's ridiculous. Of course you don't have ADD. Look at you. You're, whatever it is that you're succeeding at, but you're succeeding at the cost of unbelievable anxiety and depression and all sorts of other things." So there are things to read. I have things on my website that explain something in 3 or 4 pages that you can download about, one's called What the ADHD Brain Wants and Why, which just explains really quickly, why even when you intend to do something, how you and your brain are sometimes at odds with one another. Also, just what a woman's experience is like, so that they can be hearing it from somewhere other than you, and that always seems to work better. For everyone. It has nothing to do with you, but it's just that they need to hear it from other sources, but I think once people understand it, then they can become, part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And, I try so hard to get people to engage their significant others so that it is a team rather than hiding it from the significant other. And that has to do with feeling entitled to believe that this is, that the societal expectations are completely off from what is realistic for anybody, and that this is, this is the fallout of this kind of brain wiring, and certain things are easy, certain things can be amazing in terms of creativity and enthusiasm and intensity, but certain things are going to be hard, and you have to find an answer to that. So it's about feeling entitled to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think many people are saying, I can't share this with my spouse. My spouse is not empathetic.
Right.
So, yeah, that's a tough one, I think. Can we turn back to the comment you made about glucose? I think in a recent session with Dr. Russell Barkley, he also mentioned glucose specifically and actually advised drinking a sugary drink. Is that something that you also have seen in your mention about the ADA symptoms make you call out for glucose?
Yeah, again, this is one of those things like the estrogen that we don't have the answer to the best way to handle this yet. It's just science marching on. But the thing we do know is that the ADHD brain thinks that it needs more glucose. It doesn't necessarily. It just doesn't metabolize it as well as other brains. So that it's really about understanding, okay, whether it's a sugary drink or, for women especially, carbs have the added benefit of they also increase serotonin, and that sort of can numb you out a little bit, so it takes the edge off the franticness. So the combination of those two things of, giving your brain what it wants in terms of energy and calming you down is a really, a winning combination for women, and that's why, carbs and sugary things, and especially chocolate, which has, it's the trifecta because it also has caffeine, so it does all of those things. But understanding that, what you're doing is you are medicating the neurotransmitter unbalance in your brain. That is what you're doing. You're not just saying, to hell with my diet and I'm going to eat carbs and I don't care. It is literally your brain is saying this is what we need to function better. And it's just another way of trying to get the kind of stimulation that will allow you to focus.
Right. Okay. Maybe we could just turn in our last minutes here to some practical tips that you might want to suggest. There's some wonderful comments. One person says, I can't get the children to school on time. Last semester, my kids had 5 tardy marks on the report card. And someone else chimed in and said, boy, I wish my kids only had 5. It's more like 15. 15 tardies. So, she said that's really hard to get out the door on time, especially when your kids also have ADHD.
Right.
Have anything to offer these moms who, this is one of the big moments for ADHD moms at getting out the door in the morning?
There is no question. I think that it is. I think the mornings are the single most horrible time of the day, and many women will burst into tears if they get their children on the bus. So there's a couple of things to say about it. I mean, one is to realize that you may think that the ultimate goal is to get your kids to school at exactly the right time. But I might argue and say that the ultimate goal is to get your kids to school without any of you feeling like, your lives are not worth living. And very often, what ends up happening is there's so much fighting and screaming and blaming that isn't worth it. Now, I mean, this is not addressing, okay, so what exactly should I do? There's 1,000 different pieces. There are 1,000 different moving pieces in getting kids to school on time. And a lot of it has to do with, taking your own ADD into account and understanding that it isn't going to work like, a finely oiled clock. And part of that is your kids and part of that is you. And so that, building in the extra time for all of the distractions you have, as well as your kids and all the things that get in the way, has something to do with it. But I'm not saying, then you can just do that and everything will be fine. There are many pieces to it, but what I'm saying is that this is, obviously schools don't like children to be late either, but I think that you have to balance the quality of what goes on. And, if you can accept, okay, we have a bunch of people with ADD here, and we're doing the best we can to do this and try to keep the focus on we're all working together to get out the door, as opposed to, you are thwarting me in my goal to get this done. I think that, relationships will feel better. And, at the end of the day, the kids are going to say, it was horrible. You yelled at me in the morning. Or you'll be saying, I feel horrible. I yelled at my kids in the morning, as opposed to any of you saying, but my kids were 5 minutes late and that was the disaster of the day. So, I mean, it's sort of a reframing what's important in terms of creating the yardstick that works for you and making everybody's emotional experience of their lives a little higher on the rating scale.
Okay. There's a lot of funny comments. I wish you all could see it. One person says, the truant officer is threatening to call us. And another one says, my kid had 17 tardies. So there's and there's one that says 25. So this is a really common problem, and it leads to another problem, which Ashley brings up. She says, I have lists everywhere. I'm multiple lost, forgotten lists. I have unfinished projects, to-do lists. I exist in a constant state of rushing and catching up. And what I'm really afraid of is that my children will have no benchmark for what normal is like in life. And that's so typical, too, because she's worried about her kids rather than herself. But yeah, I think there is a consensus here among the moms that they don't want their children to grow up in this kind of chaos.
Right. Well, and, children are not aware, really, that it's chaos for quite a long time, that they understand that other families run differently. But one of the things that you can do is acknowledge these things are hard for me. And you can, there are people that you can, if I think the school offers some if you can afford them. There are, there are tutors and organizational people who can sort of help everyone organize so that, you're not trying to pretend that this is the right way to do it, but it's not, it's like this is a difficult thing and we all have trouble doing it.
Right.
So that things can be put in place for everyone, but everyone has to be working together on it. And that's why spouses being involved is a huge part of it, rather than being judged by yet another source. if being late is, and there's no question, being late to school is a big deal. Truant officers are out there. I write letters to schools all the time trying
Really?
all the time, because I'm not going to say there aren't sometimes real world consequences, but nonetheless, even those real world consequences don't make your brain better at this, so that, so sometimes everyone can learn together other ways to do it, and asking, kids for having baskets around. Every kid has their own basket, and they have to deal with their own stuff in some way, even if they just take their basket of stuff and put their toys or their clothes in it and dump it in their room. It's a concept that, organizing the entire world of your family is not yours alone and is difficult, and is something that everyone can learn,
Right.
And needs to learn.
There's some wonderful suggestions being posted. Belinda says we had 67 tardies, and now my son's in boarding school, which is the best solution for us. Someone else says, there are IEPs and 504 plans which allow being late as an accommodation. It's an interesting one. And then there's a coach, Mary, on the, let me find her post here, who says she works often with people on this issue, and that's Mary Smith, her name is, and it has to be a family-specific solution, that there's no magic bullet, that for each family coming up with a morning routine is pretty much unique to their life. So that makes sense. All right. Well, here's someone says, how about an IEP for parents? That's great.
Right.
We are out of time. This has been such a wonderful webinar. I really can't thank you enough. You'll have to come back and talk some
I have
more,
so much more to say. So
yeah, I know. And we really, there's so many people who have really, this has meant so much to them. And I know we could go much farther down the road of tips. And this is the best webinar I've ever listened to, Michelle posts. So thank you so much again, and thank you all for participating. Repeat her website. Okay, it's Dr.
DrEllenLittman.com. So it's
Dr. Ellen, L-N, Littman, Littman.com. So yes, please check it out, and thank you all again, and we look forward to having Dr. Littman back again another time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.